then from here we're going English, because we also have some people tuning in online, and I talked to some folks that are definitely not English. You still can't hear me? You want it here, like that? Or he needs to just increase the volume. Better? Okay, let's go. Okay, the first topic of the evening, unit testing at scale. Who from you has done anything with unit testing, Mendix or otherwise? Raise those hands a little bit higher, come on. That's pretty good. Usually it's pretty much nobody. So a little introduction about myself. Mitchel Mol, CTO and founder of Blue Green. 13 years and more experience in Mendix. Over 15 years in IT in general. Started as a classic coder, also known as high code. And I've worked with Mendix R&D and some major Mendix customers. And I love to apply Mendix at scale in some very complex environments. So let's start with some basics for everyone that didn't do anything with unit testing or still thinks it's not that useful. What is unit testing? So unit testing is pretty much a unit is the smallest piece of code that can be logically isolated in your system, which is generally a one function that a microflow does. So sometimes our microflows are way too big, of course. That's more of a process or a component. But if you can minimize what it's doing and reuse it really easily, that's kind of your unit. And unit testing is the testing of functional units of a larger software application done in isolation. So you preferably want to do that with an empty database, set up your own data, test your particular piece of code, and then based on what you're expecting, the result will be validate the output. And of course, like I said, the purpose is to validate that each unit of the software code performs as expected, and hopefully ensuring that the whole thing does what you're expecting that it does, instead of testing a full process with way too many complex variables and then never really getting to the gist of it. Unit testing is mostly done by developers during the development phase of an application, but it's definitely not just the developers' show. QA engineers, subject matter experts, all of those people can help you figure out scenarios that you can actually unit test. Why do you need unit testing? Well, it can provide early, rapid, and continuous feedback. I mean, technically, if you're testing, for example, a validation microflow or just some simple calculation logic or something like that, you generally have to go through lots of UI. You have to fill in way more than you actually want to test. And you usually have some sort of specification, you know, what you're building. And instead of repeating that test over and over again and maybe not filling in all of the scenarios because you've done this a million times now, you just run your unit test and it gives you the feedback whether you're on the right track or messing up horribly. It can reduce your code complexity. So like I said, a unit is something that does something very specifically. Instead of having these giant microflows that nobody understands, even yourself after 6 months. It simplifies debugging because you have some extra context, what your code is supposed to be doing. Your colleagues, or maybe you in 6 months, still know what you were expecting in terms of scenarios that you were testing. It serves as an automated regression test. So you could use it in your CI/CD pipeline or just run it locally before you commit and ensure that you haven't broken something that you weren't expecting to touch. And like I said, enables continuous integration, the CI in the CI/CD. It acts as a bit of living documentation because often our microflows tell one bit of story, our user stories potentially tell a little bit of additional context, and then you have your unit test that is also describing a little bit what your code is supposed to be doing. And unit test promotes best practices in software development because we're not building our giant, super complex, not so well documented pieces of code anymore, but we're splitting them up nicely in actual functional units. Some common test types, and as we've been seeing in a lot of Mendix projects that I've encountered at least, is that we're mostly focusing on the manual and exploratory testing and a little bit UI and API testing. And then sometimes we find ourselves in integration testing when we have multiple apps working together. But unit testing, as you can see, is all the way at the bottom, should be your foundation. It's not the most sexy way of testing. You don't see the nice user interface. You're building another microflow to test your previous microflow, which seems like a lot of overhead, but you're doing it automated. If you do it correct, you might even be able to use it for some load testing. So some core components of a unit test. The test fixture initializes your test environment and is your helper to make sure that you can actually run your unit test. In the Mendix App Store, that's the unit testing module. The test suites will execute one or more tests to categorize them a little bit. In case of the Mendix module, again, that's just the module that your unit tests live in. The test runner that actually executes the test suites and reports results, which is again that nice module. An assertion, which is essentially a fancy name for it checks whether the code behaves as expected. So you start with some fake objects or objects that you create specifically to test your code. You don't have to fill in everything, but just that particular piece that you need. And then test coverage is kind of measuring how much of the code is actually executed during testing and how much of your code is being covered by your unit testing. Common unit test types to start fairly easily and low key is, well, generally speaking, we want our core to function properly. So let's start with business logic that actually makes the core of your application. Usually that's processes, calculations, and whatever this particular application makes itself special. Some input validation, handle invalid inputs gracefully. I mean, we all know that testing whether something has been filled in or is the right format, etc., requires lots of checking and going back and forth, and sometimes the validations changes a little bit, and then all of a sudden downstream it doesn't work properly anymore. Validations are fairly easy to unit test. And of course integrations, and I'm not talking about actually calling another application's API, but testing all the components for your published API or your consumed API. See if your mappings work correctly and still give the correct output. Very easily done with unit tests. And to go back a little bit to the feedback module, the feedback testing, there is a nice Mendix feedback module that actually helps you capture that feedback from the Java and actually don't need to work around returning the feedback as a string or whatever to also make it unit test. Implementing a unit test. A common strategy is the AAA method, arrange, act, and assert, which means essentially make sure that you have some test data set up that you need. For example, if you're testing whether a person's information has been entered correctly and you want to run the unit test on the validation logic, you create a person object, you fill in those pieces of information that should be validated, and then you either fill it in with wrong data, because you also want to see how it triggers when it isn't entered correctly by your user, or with some successful data to see if it doesn't trigger with a false positive, of course. Then the act, which is pretty much just calling the microflow that you're testing, your unit. And then the assert is checking the output, whether it is as expected. Could be multiple asserts as well. Doesn't have to be limited to one. And essentially, to keep the unit test simple and maintainable, you execute one microflow at a time. So you're not executing multiple microflows to test them in one unit testing microflow. You only execute that microflow once. So not once with happy path, once with error path, etc. You split that out over multiple unit test microflows. And I'm not sure what I meant with separation. Let's skip that one. Some unit testing in action. So I actually prepared a demo, which is a live demo. So if something goes wrong, I'll just blame it on that. And I'll try to zoom in a little bit, but I think it's fairly readable. So a unit test is, with the unit testing module, nothing more than another microflow. It does some basic setup. It has a particular prefix like UT underscore or test underscore, which get automatically picked up by the unit testing module. So you don't have to figure out how to work that. And there's, as I'm not sure if anyone read my recent blog, but I've done some enhancements to the unit testing module from Mendix, which also allows for data variation. So you can reuse your unit test microflow multiple times without having to create multiple, pretty much the same microflows with just a little bit of different data. But you can also do it fairly simple, which is essentially just a, we're setting up an assertion result. We're creating that person, and I can't zoom this part in, so those in the back, I hope you have good eyes. This person is going to be validated with the happy path, so all of the data is filled in as expected. We call our actual validation microflow, which in this case isn't a unit because I have some sub-items in there that are the actual units, but for component testing, we're doing an assert, which is pretty much nothing more than we're passing a Boolean type of value that we're validating whether it's true. If it's true, the assert has succeeded. If it's false, then something went wrong and we'll have to check out why our code is failing. We can, of course, also give a little bit of information about the assert and what the test description is all about. And here we're also using the error list or the retrieve validation feedback from the feedback module that essentially captures the feedback that was generated as part of the microflow that we're testing. And then we're using that in another assert that checks whether that error list is actually empty. If we look at that from the actual code, let's log in. You see that we here have a nice meetup module with our validation person happy path. And I see that the volume has been increased. And we had 2 asserts in here. And as you can see, both of them actually succeeded. And if something would have gone wrong, like we see on our example module, where I actually have something that always fails, you would see that this particular assert failed. You have to figure out what went wrong. Could still be your unit test as well, but pretty certain that it's my code that's failing here. So let's take a look at the code later on. And in this module, which in the basic version does everything that you need to do for unit testing, but doesn't have things like module coverage, historic results, multiple asserts. If you have multiple asserts, you have to log them yourself, otherwise you lose the information, unfortunately. And of course, also the data variation. So if you want to run this in multiple variations, and let's open up the IDE, it's a little bit more readable. We have a happy path, we have an invalid path with just an empty value set, and then of course an invalid path with no country set, which is eventually just an empty string but not a nil value. This microflow or this unit test is ran 3 times. So if we go back to the front end, you'll see that the name has 3 iterations. And for all of them, we can see that it's successful because both the input and the output, the asserts, are being updated based on the data variation. This is the happy path, so we're expecting that the isValid is returned as yes and that there's no errors. But we also have one of those unhappy paths, and you'll see that there is a isValid is no, and that there are some errors in there, and that the error returned is the error that we're expecting. If we then go back to the presentation. So how to scale, because that's what the actual subject of the meeting presentation was all about. If you want to scale your unit testing within your team, if you have a larger team than just yourself, it's important to provide some training, obviously. Sounds obvious, but I mean, it doesn't always happen that way. With some initial training, some coaching, actual guidelines so people know what is a correct unit test, how do I build my code in a way that it's actual unit testable. Capture the unit testing in KPIs would be a suggestion. Coverage and quality are 2 that needs to be combined. If you only do coverage, then people are only building unit test microflows that don't really add anything, any value. If you only do quality, they only build one. Take care of tech debt while refactoring to enable unit testing. So a lot of code is usually built within Mendix that is not directly unit testable because it does multiple functions, it's grown over the years, etc. Unit testing requires a little bit of a different approach, so might as well take the tech debt in account immediately as well. And make it a team effort. Like I mentioned in the beginning, unit tests are generally built by developers because it's in Studio Pro after all, but PO plans to require time. QA engineers help with scenarios. They know how to break things. After all, we only like to create things. And the Mendix developers to create, update your unit test while creating, changing new existing logic. And add it to your CI/CD pipeline. I'm not saying every single commit needs to run all the unit tests because at some point that might not be as valuable either, but maybe daily or before you go to acceptance or stuff like that. And seniors should be reviewing the proper implementation. So use those guidelines that you trained everybody on in the beginning to make sure that your quality is actually contributing to the unit testing advantages. Any questions? Any questions from online, perhaps? Okay. Any questions from the group?
How does the model describe compared to Mendix?
The question is, how does the models compare to Menditect? Well, there's an actual Menditect representative in the crowd as well. I would say the unit testing module for Mendix could be a nice starting point if you're figuring out how to implement unit testing as part of your development process, to start learning it without actually going into the deep end immediately and then evolving into Menditect, given that their tool actually does quite a bit more than the Mendix module itself. Any other questions?
Have you applied this in larger applications and what's your experience from?
Yes, I've applied it in both applications that I could apply it in the beginning, immediately from the get-go, and after, as an afterthought. The problem with as an afterthought is that usually you get to refactor a lot more to make it actual unit testable, or you're starting with component testing. So essentially having very large microflows that you have some basic scenarios defined for, but it's difficult to say that your coverage is then actually covering all of the scenarios that your code that you're testing relies upon. And the problem with that is usually that developers are used to going fast and then some test engineers breaking it, and sometimes you're dealing with a bug and now they actually have to sit in that seat a little bit as well. So it's a culture change as well.
Could you tell a bit more about the data variations possibility?
Yeah, the question is if I could tell a little bit more about the data variation. I'm not sure what exactly you want more. I could show you a little bit more about it, but it's other than the JSON, which contains the input parameters and the assert values. It's just a very simple way of reusing your unit test microflow with multiple variations. That means that if you have a happy path, you're actually filling in the data. If you have an unhappy path or an error path, you're maybe filling in the wrong data or no data. But it's running the exact same microflow, and it essentially the module takes care of reading the fact that there's data variations, because you could also run without. And then the first iteration of the microflow call is reading the JSON information, and then the subsequent calls are executing it as many times as you have data variations in your JSON. Yes, you define the variations manually, and it's done via this way because then it's all part of one package. It's all in the code, and you don't need to do runtime configuration or read it from an external server or anything like that.
One question from the chat. What do you think is the tipping point for creating or not creating unit tests? That could be in terms of complexity, but also in types of functionality.
Okay, I'm gonna try to repeat that. The question was, what is the tipping point of creating or not creating a unit test? And then something about complexity. I would say, unless it's purely a UX interaction with your calculation logic in the background or anything like that, anything could be unit testable. There are microflows that bring all of the units together, which are your process microflows. Those usually aren't really up for a unit test situation. But then you get to the second layer in our pyramid, which is the component testing. I wouldn't not unit test any part of my code, because it means, especially if you're the only developer on there, or if you're a small team of developers that might switch to another project soon, if you get back to that code later on, it's the easiest way to make sure that once you apply more changes, it's actually easy testable without having to dive fully in there again. And it's way easier, in my opinion, to test calculation logic, validation logic, and API type of logic compared to doing it with external tools or UI-based testing.
So what I would like to do today is take you through a few of the trends for 2024 in the low-code scene. But we'll start with introduction myself, but I guess nobody knows who I am. So my name is Weijers. I'm the CEO and founder of Blue Green. I've been over 12 years or so in the delivery side of IT, so never touched Mendix in my life. Well, I downloaded a modeler and did 3 updates now, but that's about it. And I know a thing or two about transformation management at scale. But that's not what you came for, if you came for that at all. So what I will be sharing about today is about 4 trends and why I think they're important and what they could mean to you as a consultant and or a developer. Of course, I'm going to explain a bit why this is important and what it actually is, what I'm going to explain, and the impact, of course. What I'm not going to share about is AI, because we've been over that, I guess, you guys. Big data, composability, we've all heard about it. So I guess this must be a big relief that those topics will not be covered. And I'm also not going to cover, of course, all the Gartner stuff. We read about that already. And yeah, you're not here for that, I guess. What might be more interesting is a few of the trends we've spotted, of which are quite practical, actually. And we see them in every day when you're in the Mendix for local scene. I would like to start off with IT ambassadorship and promotion. It's like an extra ingredient in the mix for successful digital execution. And for one party in particular, they added it as a 5th P. So we all know the 3 S's and the 4 P's in the cookbook of Mendix, of course. But there was added an extra 5th P. So what is this 5th P and why is it important to foster IT ambassadorship? Well, research shows that achieving digital execution at scale requires a change in organization and within the people. And in this endeavor, in this journey, the whole team is involved and needs to contribute to hit this wave of success, to build momentum as a foundation of the organizational shift. So is this an important trend, and why would this be an important trend? Well, getting everybody on the bandwagon by chiefly promoting all of those steps, you make them part of digital execution approach. It fosters the atmosphere where employees really are more likely to follow and embrace the change than resist. And they see it as an opportunity to grow rather than resist it as a threat. So why would you do such a thing? It's plainly only for the change success rate. If you're going to push something, a movement forward, you want it to succeed. And science has proved that change success rate will go up when there's more involvement. Well, what would be an impact of this trend? Well, it all begins in understanding how it aligns with the organizational strategy. So what we see in this trend, that program managers or similar will start with inform the whole team about the goals and the objectives of what lies ahead of them. This helps, of course, team members to contextualize their work and in this broader sense, you know. Without sense and purpose, there's no change, there's no following, there's no leadership. So the expectations in this is that the whole team is widely and actively involved in early contribution and engage with the first few applications and celebrate them together. So the sprint reviews might be a bit different. They will help to a really broad audience. not only the stakeholders, not only a few sponsors or Sprint Zero, only the team. Everybody's joining the party to see that this IT thing is going to be a party you want to be at. And to keep momentum going, it's important to acknowledge achievements and milestones and celebrate the success you have. Will be a huge, huge positive uprise and the visibility of the program. And as a developer, you fulfill this key role. Normally, you have the development team, you have your PO, you have the Scrum Master, your sponsors, all way ahead from what you're doing, and you're just in the team delivery. We added in this promotion, and it's a huge trend because you guys will be more and more actively involved as being consultants, being a developer, to foster this great opportunity of change and keep momentum going and keep the organizational shift on target, actually. So after tonight, you're not only a code wizard, you're doing all of those great things, you're going to be a vital key player in the organizational change. And this is what you're going to experience now. You've seen it. Okay, this fifth P. Why am I invited now to all of those parties, release parties, broad review, stuff like that? Well, actually, there's a science to the madness. It's on purpose to let those first few important successes be the road that broadened for your future endeavors in IT. Gonna take a bit of this. Is the sound like this okay, or should I put it up like this? Oh, echo. That's not good. So another key trend that I spotted is that the uprise of self-service and low-effort deployments products, which increase productivity and reduce cognitive load. I'm sure a few people in this audience already know about it, or actually maybe executing these services or providing it in a professional manner. But what is meant by this? App development and delivery is greatly influenced by the self-service or low-effort deployment products. Self-service is amongst organizations supported by a discipline which we call platform engineering. Maybe that sounds familiar. And platform is the place where an organization's workload, the applications, the systems, or IT environment will land. And this can range from internal development environments or all the way to hybrid cloud self-service stuff, which is now accessible with a click of a button sometimes. And this sounds really familiar, but this is really a trend. Well, beginning of the year, this month, was published that the platform engineer was the new hot role for 2024. They expect an increased demand for this role because of the self-service that is now implemented in, let's say, products of AWS, in Mendix, or major companies make it as a core foundation of what they do. And it's promising to actually optimize developer experience and accelerate products team delivery. And it's pretty much the same, let's say, wave that once was contributing to the growth of low-code. You could achieve more in less time, and you can only focus on your core problems, your execution. You don't have to be full stack, so to say. So why is it important? Actually, I kind of hinted at it already. And the self-service platform is foundational for the environment to foster the efficiency and quality and innovation, scalability, and stuff like that. And it's taking care of updates, monitoring, optimization, troubleshooting, all the hard part, actually. It takes that away from you. And there's the development teams that can benefit not only by reduced operational tasks, the cognitive load and what do I have to care about, but also from increased quality of the platform, because you click it, you deploy it, you get integrations immediately up and running, security up and running. You don't have to think about how I'm going to load balance, stuff like that. So we see this as a big next leap in efficiency and agility, because, yeah, let's be honest, all things lead to efficiency. You know, there's always a time and there's scarce. There's skilled people, those are scarce as well. And consistency and quality is then key for your delivery success. So 2024, 25, 26, I will see and expect a huge uptake in those low-effort deployment products of self-service, platform engineer, whatnot. It's all a bit the same. This is the same term for, different term for the same approach. So what's the impact on the day-to-day of developers? Because I guess most of you guys will be from actually doing hard software stuff and not doing all the talkative stuff that I do. Well, what's in it for you really is that the frictionless self-service development experience offers capabilities that developers can focus on adding value. You know, getting your hands dirty with the nitty-gritty stuff, and do that with as little as overhead as you can. You know, purely focusing on your software delivery. Developers benefit then from, let's say, ready-to-use and automated processes, boosting the speed at which they can roll out new applications and build software and integrate stuff. So the goal of this all is meant to increase, of course, again, developer productivity, but as well reduce cognitive load, which there is less chance that you make a fault because you can't oversee it all. Now you can just be in your part of expertise, and it is always suited for the way the team works. So a platform from platform engineering should suit the way the teams are working together within an organization. So this way, developers should be able to deploy and run their own apps and devices and services end to end. So it's kind of the you build it, you run it through DevOps approach. Everything you touch upon is for you. You deploy it, you run it, you design it, you decommission it, just with a click of a button. Little break here as well. So this one I'm kind of fond of, actually. I'm going to explain in just a bit why I think this is maybe a bigger thing than lies on the surface of this few sentences. But I think that citizen development shapeshifts into citizen PO-ship and thus redefine the ways and the roles in the rapid application development environments. Ever since the start of citizen developmentship and the thoughts about citizen developmentship, it was all about democratizing IT. You know, everybody could be in IT and everybody could build an app. And there has been a huge focus on that as well, mainly on the marketing side. If I talk to that guy, they said, citizen developmentship, still like you need to be a craftsmanship. And a lot of those times, you see that it's really hard to accomplish what was initially assumed. You know, everybody can be this developer from the get-go. And why is it like this? Well, actually, the dream of the citizen developership was maybe a bit based upon how you do your DIY projects at home. You know, yeah, I can remodel this and I can go to Hornbach and get that stuff, and then look at me now. But on the other hand, yes, that enables you a bit to do stuff. But you can't build a house like that, you know. So the tool was not meant for you. Hornbach was never meant for you to do DIYing. It was meant for people that actually build homes to add the steady state quality, extra functionalities, standard functionalities to the homes. You know, doors, sockets, stuff like that. It needs to be consistent and need to be installed easily. So it didn't really live up to what they anticipated it to be. So now you see that there's a bit of a shift. And the shift is going into the citizen PO. So citizen PO-ship, that's like, it's a non-technical individual within an organization that takes care of the end-to-end role of a product owner without any prior experience in building software. So that sounds like a great idea. Maybe as good as like, you know, the citizen developer. But oftentimes these citizen POs are the key users in a certain specific domain or a problem. And that is where a big key to the difference lies. So I think it's particularly important in environments, in organizations where there's a central IT team and decentralized business units with problems. And there's a need for a dedicated resource within that knowledge on a specific topic, let's say key users, to be on top of this business problem. But why? Now, well, actually, if you're in touch with this guy that actually does know what the problem is and maybe how he wants to solve it, there's a great reduction in the number of details that get lost in translation between a business analyst and a PO and then somebody else that maybe prioritized a bit. There's buy-in from the involved business unit. It improves the chance that the delivered product actually met the expectations of what the customer wants, reduces rework, and therefore timelines are being met, of course, and reduced project overhead because the stakeholders are now part of the team. So a lot of communication lines are cut there. And then you ask, of course, is it all shiny and gold? Is this then, okay, we get rid of the citizen developer, hooray, because we're craftsmanship. And now we have the citizen PO who never built any applications himself. That's going to be a nightmare. Well, the citizen PO does need to be actively coached. Otherwise, you get rubbish. There needs to be a clear heartbeat in the planning. When is the review? When are you expected this? When are we going to refine, actually, do a bit of backlog grooming maybe? And there's always a need for a proxy PO to help get the initial backlog, so to say, ongoing. And most of all, it requires a mature development team. So there can only be citizen POs with a mature development team. So a lot of words, sorry about that. But what is the impact on the day-to-day of the developers? Well, developers may experience a less complexity in the communication because they're working with this PO who knows where it's for, and they're at the same desk. And there's less communication with business owners because, he's next to you. You're gaining a greater understanding, of course, about the specifics of the topics and why it's important and what you're actually trying to resolve. And the citizen PO, which has buy-in in the business unit, is responsible as well for acceptance testing. So it speeds up a lot of things. It cuts a lot of corners. So you're not going to cut the corner. Everybody can build an application. You're going to cut the corner with information, and you're going to improve iterations. But there are of course, some challenges. I'm not talking about technical processes and outcomes, but on wishes and things they feel and experience. The scope creep is a fact rather than something that might occur, and the requirements might be all over the place in the beginning. So it's not that great, but we see this shift going on in especially larger organizations. So, and I think this one is pretty obvious for you guys as well. Templating, industry-specific templating might be the next big accelerator for low-code industry because, well, this is a bit of a weird shit, but well, the industry-specific templates are, let's say, sort of 80% the same issues are in a specific industry, and you're going to solve that 80%, let's say, integration to a certain broker. Or maybe we're doing planning with in logistic with trucks. So that module, everybody's planning with trucks, we get that in. But the specifics always lies in those 20% of the requirements that make the business unique. And that's really the biggest challenge. And it's a bit of a devil's dilemma because sometimes those companies want to have like a one-stop solution. They want to buy something and get rid of it. And then they say, oh, it doesn't do what I want. And then they actually rebuild everything from scratch. So, and I think that with templating, you solve only, let's say, the base layer, and the 20% that is then flexible, which allows you to accelerate a bit. And those industry templates are more or less solving the baseline for the application for developers and trying to solve business challenges in a specific industry rather than doing really fancy stuff. So why is it important? Well, customers most often, like I said, are in the market for off-the-shelf solutions to their problems. They're not looking for software, they're looking for solutions for the problems. And they might be a bit reluctant to take on custom software projects that require certain skill and knowledge and whatnot that they don't think they possess, or they don't want to possess. On the other hand, the off-the-shelf solutions are not flexible enough, and adding change is a nightmare. And custom coding isn't fast enough either, and skill intensive. So industry-specific templating within low-code, it solves pretty much all the things I mentioned before, but as well improves time to market, which is vital for your business case. It offers a shorter return on investment because, you get 80% or let's say half of the work already done from the get-go. And it opens the door for faster adoption for low-code. Like, low-code oftentimes is now being perceived as custom applications. And with an industry-specific template, you can start with sort of a package and then get into all of those adoptions and custom code and really easily. So it's actually a stepping stone to get more organization involved with low-code rather than trying to do product sales or so. So what is the main gain for developers? Well, all the valuable time for you guys isn't wasted with, let's say, general stuff. Of course, the Mendix platform already does do a ton of that. But with templates, you get rid of even more of that stuff in a specific industry. So you can be focused on, let's say, the specifics of a certain companies, make them different, or their solutions, or their gremlins. You can get your hands on that puzzle immediately and solve those complex processes. And of course, then you focus only on the high business value things, not on the generic stuff that wastes half the product budget. So yeah, and yeah, I think the best thing is the business stakeholders will be amazed, because sprint 0 is, okay, we have a foundation. Sprint 1 and 2 will be, oh, you actually know what we're doing. And then in sprint, I don't know, 4 or so, then you actually see, let's say 80% of the business running in the application. And that will, again, for the promotion, trend 1, that will greatly impact as well the wave of enthusiasm for making this IT thing work within the organization. Because nobody likes to shift from, we worked in this program for years, and now you make me do this. I know it was a bit fast and a bit and a lot. So I think the main things, other than the AI, big data, the Gartner stuff, is that IT ambassadorship and promotion will be a huge uptake in all the bigger Mendix implementation projects, and you're going to be a part of that party. Self-service, you see it more in the Mendix platform, but around as well. AWS, for instance, you see that a lot. Citizen developmentship, I think we're going to abandon that a bit. Welcome the citizen PO. And industry-specific templating, I know at least half of the Mendix partners are working on that. So it must be a trend. Back to thanks. Thank you.